Hey, Patreon people. This is the Bonus M Extra for Season 8, Episode 16. At least I think it will be 16. On the book Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Costs of the Perfect Playlist by Liz Pelly. In fact, I can reach back here and get it and show it to you now. Boom. There it is on the screen. I do recommend getting it. I think it's a great book. And as promised, this bonus M extra is my chapter by chapter take on the book. So consider this kind of book talk 11.1 or zero point 0.5 or whatever you want to say. It is an addendum to Book Talk 11. And those of you who are out in the wild, because I have decided to share this with everyone a few weeks after it debuts on Patreon, please consider supporting this show. Patreon.com/music is not a genre. As little as $1 a month will get you not just bonus M extras like this, but maybe 60 or 70 of them at this point. I think there might be 80 or 90 even, and exclusive music and discounts and all of these other things. And that $1 a month, just you can't imagine how much of a support it is for indie artists like me and indie creators like me and this show. So here's the format of this bonus, just so you know. When I read a book that I know I'm going to be covering on the show, I take copious notes. Anything that comes to mind, anything in the book, etc., etc. I write them down and in my phone, actually. And some of those notes went towards what Steve and I talked about in Back Talk in the main episode. But there's so much that we didn't cover that I thought it was worth it to go through a lot of the rest of the book. So just keep in mind one thing, which is that these notes are in front of me. And even though I'm looking like I am looking at you because I'm staring at the camera eye, I'm actually going to be staring at my notes as I do this, and you're going to see me scrolling. You might even hear the mouse and things like that, which, I mean, hey, that's totally fine, right? So let's just jump right into it. There's an introduction. There are 18 chapters and a conclusion. And I'm not going to read every single note that I wrote because that would take too long, but I am going to kind of just go through them and see what sparks something interesting, right? So Liz Pelly immediately establishes her connection to musicians in that she worked not just as a journalist, she is a journalist, but she worked at a Brooklyn music venue, DIY music venue. So right around the corner from us here. It's a very good introduction. It does initially mention payola, which is something she brings up later in the book. I do feel like the essay that she writes on that, or even that section in the introduction, could have been its own standalone essay, the kind of dominance of major labels, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe, that could have been excerpted and put in a magazine or as a blurb online. This is a story of listeners being sold music more as a utility than an art form. That's what the title of the subtitle of Mood Machine, even the title itself, the perfect playlist, the fact that it's all about the mood of what you're listening to. It's a story of hyper commercialization, individualism, and all of the above being obfuscated under the notion of quote unquote vibes. And this is a quote from the book. And it's the story of how those problems that played out over the span of many years as music became personalized, playlisted, autoplayed, and algorithmic. It's the story of social, cultural, and political issues that came with those changes. What makes culture less interesting for listeners is also what makes it less sustainable for artists. But knowing the opposite is also true, that working collectively to improve material conditions for musicians benefits all of us who love listening to music too. That's where there's power and possibility, and we'll get to that more towards the end of the book. Chapter 1 is called The Bureau of Piracy. So this is a bit of a prehistory of Spotify, talking about that era of the Napster era, as they call it, but it was the, downloading any music you could find for free. And it was interesting that it aligned protests of corporatization with the promotion of free file sharing in the early 2000s. So there was this idea of people like Lars Ulrich and all of that who were saying like piracy was bad, and it was to a certain extent, even though we all benefited from it as listeners. But what came after, which we'll get to soon, would seem to have been a corrective of that. But over the ensuing decade, we'll see how that kind of shifted to it being, in some ways, worse, frankly. So streaming in the beginning was labels trying to jump in early to avoid losing money, and it did not work. It was first described in the media as a huge conspiracy. In fact, streaming itself, and this was the early 2000s. Um, our founder of Sweden's Pirate Bay file sharing collective says that for them, it never really appeared that the official music economy was a working entity anyway. This is a point that I'm glad she brought up because it's important to remember that the music industry has never been good for most artists. And Spotify, has, in the streaming era, has made it worse. But that's because the culture in general right now is worse for everybody, whether you're an artist or not. The income inequality, hoarding money at the top, not giving it to your employees, et cetera, et cetera. And that the copyright system doesn't do much to ensure musicians get paid fairly either. Chapter 2, quote unquote, saving the music industry. Spotify was not intended to be about music. It was intended to combine advertising, streaming, and peer-to-peer technology. And it's important to remember that Daniel Ek and the other guy who started it were not music people, weren't really that into music. They were just looking for something cheap to put on their platform to attract advertisers, et cetera, et cetera. It seems obvious in hindsight that a company whose main focus was ads would be named Spotify, because spot is another name for an ad. Question was what content would drive the traffic that would make the ads attractive. Music was easy. It was cheap. And it's at this point I started to feel like in some ways that idea of Liz Pelly being kind of the she's doing a great job, but the idea of her being kind of a little strident when it came to defiance of certain things, that I felt changed as the book went on. I felt a little bit better about that because I realized that she did dive more into the history of the music industry. That's was getting to me, that the music industry has been this way forever. The first music that Spotify used way back in the 2000s was pirated music. And it remained there until 2009. The thing that's most attractive to all of us is what? Whether it's Amazon or Spotify or other streaming services, TV, whatever, watching movies at home, ease of use. These things will never go away until there is something that is easier for people to use. Each subsequent music format has been easier to use than all previous ones. There's a quote on there that calls it the celestial jukebox, which for listeners is a great thing. Record execs were quick to see how this service would benefit them, a better subscription service than all the other clunky attempts that they made. Let's remember that streaming was made primarily by and for major label executives, consultants, and admin and venture capitalists. No. And just a side note for me, I need people to stop talking about the comeback of vinyl, because it's still such a small percentage that it's disturbing to me that people are making a big deal of this, 10 or 15 years after they started talking about it. Indie companies suffered the most, of course, despite the discovery being the platform buzzword. Yeah, but no money for those indie companies. So it was basically like advertising for the music, but you weren't actually making any money on it. This is, again, this idea of a trickle-down economy where you give the money to the people at the top and it will filter down to everyone else, and that has not happened for most artists. Chapter 3, selling lean back listening. Music was meant to be background, disengagement, muzak, elevator music, recorded music is something that needs and asks for minimal attention, passive listening. And keep in mind that algorithms are not blind. They're not random. They favor songs more played and have more money and push behind them. Playlists most chosen are pushed to the fore by either major labels or Spotify itself. So there isn't Daniel X said, saying in the beginning that he was quote unquote leveling the playing field by creating Spotify is bullshit. It always has been, is the thing. I initially thought, as I said in the main episode, that there was some credence to this in the beginning and that we maybe just missed the window. But no, from the beginning, they had always intended to push the things that were already making more money. So Early curation was about which songs and artists could win a popularity contest. I don't know. Spotify absorbed smaller companies the same way Meta and Google and Amazon have done, companies that suited their needs, playlisting companies like Tunigo being primary. A quote on page 30 said the music industry is not devoted to the production of supply, but rather to the production of demand itself. So, can you get people to want something, regardless of who, are you paying the people who are supplying it well enough, or is the stuff they're doing even good? Playlists connected to mixtapes and homogenized curated radio playlists like the Clear Channel era. Test marketing songs on less popular playlists to see how they perform. What strikes me is that the author is only partly aware that that's how the whole music industry has worked since at least the 1930s. And that's something that comes up often. She says the peak playlist era was 2016 to 2019. So, as artists out there, if you are paying money for somebody to promote you to Spotify playlists, stop. The peak playlist era is over. It's been over for a while, and what they get you is not going to get you what you want it to. Streams are most earned by music just inoffensive enough to not get shut off. That is an author quote. Spotify for artists offer to pitch playlists only really works if you are connected or know somebody. So, I'm sorry about people who are hoping for that. Another author quote, not everyone who makes music wants to be a pop star, so non-pop artists have it harder on streaming. Great. But there's no comment there that that's how the world has always been. It's worse now, but it's always been that way. Pauline Oliveros in the book Deep Listening, there's a difference between hearing and listening, and maybe that's why modern pop sounds so passive and why lo-fi, as newly defined, is so popular. We find out later in the book that that is very true. Book quote from a Spotify employee, I honestly think that the core of the company's success was recognizing that they're not selling music. They're not providing music. They're filling people's time. And he said at a company meeting, I remember he was like, and this is Daniel, like, Apple Music, Amazon, these aren't our competitors. Our only competitor is silence. Depressing. Chapter 4, The Conquest of Chill, the false idea of infinite growth. Yet again, compelled the money and power hungry to corrupt something that could have been structured more equitably and more for the artist's benefit. They needed to branch out from the initial core audience of music lovers to a much broader audience. Their need for that meant they were shifting marketing from music to mood, which is something Edison tried to do in 1921, actually listing mood music categories that we'd all be familiar with. Mood music to relax to, music when you're sad, things like that. Look up that list, the Thomas Edison list from 1921 on music moods. One of the major problems with both of these is that they deliberately limited what music would be included. Muzak debuted in 1934. They didn't own the music and couldn't or didn't want to pay for it, so Muzak opened their own studio and hired session musicians to create their own music. It increased work productivity in the 1940s. Especially, in fact, music was used to increase work productivity in factories in the 1940s. It was Muzak was rebranded in 2011 as Mood Media, and also does scents. So mood scents, like candle, like aromatic things. Brian Eno, of course, the ambient music, functional music, pioneer. 1978 was meant to be an antidote to Muzak, in that it retained interest and intrigue and even uncertainty if you listen deeper. Whereas Muzak is almost without substance, meditative, ritualistic, reflective, minimalist. Quote from the book, by Musaking ambient into utilitarian self-help content, tech companies have contributed to ambient going the way of punk and folk traditions that started out rooted in philosophies of musical relationships, now flattened to the point that many listeners hear them solely as aesthetics. That I can untangle that for 20 minutes. 1980s were prime for Muzak. 1990s were prime for chill coffee house CDs or other mood CDs. By 2016, even Eno was becoming disillusioned by ambient music. Lo-fi started as a Jay Dilla and Madlib influenced genre and also got homogenized. Spawned sketchy new labels collecting lo-fi, like the one I briefly contributed to, Chameleon, whatever, Indie Chameleon or whatever. And they're probably less sketchy than most labels out there. Firefly and Epidemic were two companies, Swedish background music. began to take over playlists as their music was replacing indie artists' music. So chapter 5, Ghost Artists for Hire. Since 2015, the first year music sales went up and not down like the 15 years prior to that, from 2000 to 2015. Because of Spotify, it might be possible to say that as the last 10 years have passed, there's more music being released than ever before and less of it being listened to than ever before. Background music pumped out by no-name session musicians. No royalties for them. They just get paid a session fee. This is not the first time, but I guess it is the biggest, the most that it's ever happened. I can tell you that you can tell the difference between real and fake artists if you really listen. I can also tell you that most people don't really listen. It's like shell company stuff, except the smaller companies, aka the bands, are fake, called PFC, or Perfection Fit Content. Quote on this from the book: Spotify had gamed its system against any musician who knew their worth. They didn't want to pay money to musicians. And of course, this, as usual, disproportionately affected artists of color. Chapter 6, the background music makers. PFC, Perfection Fit Content, is made by producers feeding real content to music writers to use as templates. It's kind of like what shows do as cost-saving measures. When they can't afford the rights to a real song, they'll say, do this, but don't do this. It's a template. Or you can cover the song and you don't have to pay as much for a cover. And the only time that's shady is when it's either way too close to the original, but not close enough for a lawsuit. You're not giving royalties to the original musicians, the creators. Musicians are directed to play as simply and inoffensively as possible. There's one musician in there who said they were playing, the way a musician wants to, which is interestingly, and the director was like, you're doing too much. And tried it again, you're doing too much, and just kept getting simpler and simpler. They're akin to music beds that are often used for YouTube videos, etc., Instagram videos, generic background music. Epidemic Sound comes up again. I have applied for jobs for them. I'm kind of happy I didn't get one. It's a big player in this kind of music, but better than some because it at least splits royalties with the composers 50-50. This book is illustrating it's not just an accident of the new internet and streaming world that music creators find it harder and harder to make a living or any money at all. It is by design. It's designed that we make less money. Quote from the book: My epidemic source brought up some wisdom that David Bowie once shared in an interview about staying true to yourself as an artist. Never play to the gallery. Bowie offered in a 1997 interview. Never work for other people. Always remember that the reason you initially started working is that there was something inside yourself that you felt if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that. That's David Bowie. There's little to no difference between the old practice of record labels cheating artists out of royalties by paying a flat fee up front for the music and these PFC companies doing the same thing. The only small difference is that there's a much greater loss of revenue now than there was then. Not all stock music is created equal, just like not all stock photography is created equal. Some of it can be interesting, like some music is actually interesting, but that does not excuse the business model. Chapter 7, Stream Bait Pop. As modern music artists, we're all used to checking data or analytics. The top of this chapter points out how Spotify for Artists, which is the site that Spotify artists use to check their analytics, and I do check it often, more often than I'd care to admit, encourages us to think of our music as product and follow the numbers when deciding what to record and release next. That I don't do. I do not do that. I follow what I create what I want to, or what I'm hired to do. Pointless and it's historically is also that's also been the case, is the thing. This is not a new thing. How many artists have tried to recreate that one hit and end up falling flat? Even big artists. Thus the ubiquity of one-hit wonders, and in the case of the streaming world, zero-hit wonders. Spotify insistence that it's a level playing field and we need indeed artists have control of our destiny is both annoying and complete bullshit. It's why I do not pay for Spotify promotion. Songs only monetized if played for at least 30 seconds. They continue to make more and more rules to make sure you get paid less and less, is basically what's happened. This might have helped instigate the hyperpop movement. Oh, if you can make a song that's only 30 seconds or a minute, then boom, people are going to listen to the whole thing. Front load with choruses. That said, my manager 30 years ago suggested that I should try to write a song which started with the chorus, which I did. It didn't help my career at all. And even though it's a decent song, it was not my favorite song on the album. So be careful what reasons you make to change how you make music. It doesn't pay to be too genre specific, apparently, because if you are more generic, you will end up on more playlists. Here's a quote: Spotify sound, a deluge of platform optimized pop that was muted, mid-tempo, and melancholy, which came to the fore in 2018, hasn't left and has shaped what I call the blandscape of popular music ever since. Emo-ish and emotional wallpaper, whispery vocal, ASMR-like. It's called Spotify core. It's sort of like lo-fi with vocals. Mention of the coffee shop playlist, as I just recently noted. 2019, when the Copyright Royalty Board ruled to raise mechanical royalties, Spotify, Amazon, Google, and Pandora all sued. By 2020, if you were not trending on both Spotify and TikTok, no one in the industry would pay any attention to you. And that 30-second rule went down to 3 to 5 seconds. If you didn't catch somebody's attention in 3 to 5 seconds, you could forget your entire career. Quote, music distribution technologies have long influenced the sound of music itself. Let's say, for example, the 45 was you can only fit 3 or 4 minutes on a side, so that's how long a song was, whatever. Or the 78 before it was like that. Format has always somehow affected how music is made. Stream bait is an extension of this, the give and take between technology and art. And while it's important to consider audiences when creating, there is a point when things go too far. You need to know that balance of, well, I need this song to be X number of minutes because that's easier for an audience to digest. But if it compromises what you're trying to do with it, then you've gone too far. Major label A&R is now ruled by analytics. You can't just attract someone's attention because your music is good. If your analytics don't back it up, they don't care about you. It's not really about the music, frankly, because you can pay for analytics. While all of this is not unexpected, it's according to the way the industry has always been. The biggest change is that it's almost completely shutting out any kind of music that doesn't fit those formats. Chapter 8, listen to yourself. I haven't used Pandora in a while, but when it did come out, I remember it feeling like a revelation because I felt at least then that the mixes were pretty wide-ranging. I don't know if they're now more programmatic. I don't know. And how different is its algorithm from others? And I did, of course, that episode on the book about Pandora and the Genome Music Project and all of that stuff. And I wonder if their algorithm is markedly different from others. I don't know. Music recommender systems like this have been around since at least 1994. Not a new thing. Tagging songs based on sound, I don't dislike, frankly, because if it suggests a song that sounds, I always find that interesting, but it's how restrictive the options can be. So I love that they might, say, I play this song and then you play another song right after that has some similarity to it, whether it's in tempo or guitar or the drums or something or the vocals. But the fact that what it's pulling from is not wide enough is the thing that bothers me the most. I don't know why she doesn't make more of a fuss about Clear Channel in the book. Internet and social media bubbles. These systems are like feedback loops. You have to actively work to broaden or break. It's something Steve and I talked about at the end of our episode, which is you need to make an effort to break through the bubble. I mentioned that in another episode recently. If all you want is something giving you what you already like, then stay in the bubble by all means. But you are missing out on most of life then. And either way, it's worse for indie artists. It's terrible for indie artists. Music emotion recognition is more like emotional cliche retrieval. That's where these systems fail the most for me. They get repetitive, cloying, annoying, and eventually ineffective and irrelevant. That's why I don't like ambient playlists that say, oh, if you're feeling down and you want to get picked up, after about 2 songs, I want to kill it. I just want to throw it against the wall. Like with all social media, targeted ads, etc., we forget that we have the power to manipulate them and exert more control over these algorithms by being active and discerning about our choices. Don't click on something because it's mildly interesting, because then you get 1,000 of that. Have a little bit of control. I found most recent Spotify generated Discover playlists, unfortunately, to be bland. And I thought it was me losing touch with modern music, but no, they're designed to be bland. As I said in the main episode, I'm not a good or ideal Spotify user or any type of web user because I don't like to be spoon fed. I don't do anything passively or casually. So I don't just keep listening or watching or scrolling or clicking, which means my algorithms tend to be, fairly healthy as far as what it suggests to me. And I will go beyond those anyway, which confuses the fuck out of it. And I'm happy that it does. Listening time is not an indication of listening impact. So background music doesn't mean you actually enjoyed the music. As with all tech, algorithms like this can be used for good. In this case, who can create one that deliberately challenges users? The only reason something like that isn't part of anyone's business is because it doesn't optimize revenue. These suggestive and predictive algorithms are like AI. They're close to approximating the appearance of sentience, but not really, and will never fully get there. And you can tell the difference if you're paying attention. And they're often designed actually to be less human. And they're also meant to make the experience more about you than about the music. Fulfill your egotistical needs as opposed to exposing you to something. Modern culture continues to drift toward extreme individualism. Quote from the book, we are listening to our slightly off data double. Chapter 9, self-driving music. The DJ that Spotify created is kind of fun, kind of throwbacky, kind of enjoyable, almost never surprising, and ultimately disappointing. It's again a DJ that's too highly curated. I don't care. The app itself, the DJ app, it's a great idea. But again, it's so narrow in what it chooses. It really kind of ultimately sucks. Lots of talk about Spotify creating genre names with zero mention of the fact that 99% of genre names have always been created by the music business from the very beginning of the industry. This is not news. And again, artists rejecting the labels is not news. So I'm glad to hear people are still doing that, or not glad, depending on what I'm talking about here, but it's nothing new. It's not new to Spotify. The industry co-opting and saturating and homogenizing and eventually corrupting a genre is also not remotely new. Like post-grunge, that was homogenizing grunge, etc. Post-disco, homogenizing disco before disco even died, which is one thing that kind of pushed it out of the mainstream, was it got oversaturated with crap. So there's at least some sense of history in the book. Also, good point made that many new genres have been started by marginalized people and then 100% of the time co-opted by white, cis, and often male artists. Interesting, the two big trends, hyperpop and chillwave, are polar opposites, yet both became equally bland, and both were driven by Spotify. Pollen, this playlist, was initially big for me because it was the idea that I had about the challenging algorithm. But it ended up, it's meant to be post-genre, but it ended up becoming super, 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 super bland yet again. Commodifying mass individualism is an oxymoron. And that's why this idea of being an individual and yet somehow your individuality is being driven by your algorithm, you're bullshitting yourself. Chapter 10, fandom as data. Biggest difference between Spotify and history is scale. There have always been all of the things that are in this book, both right and wrong with Spotify at all times in the history of the music industry. It's the scale that is unprecedented. There have historically been artists and no one knows or remembers, either contemporaneously or after the fact, who made at the very least a living. And in some cases, millions of dollars. But never before have there been so many unknown and no-name artists with millions and millions of streams, ostensibly making at least some sustainable money. Searching for a vibe playlist by juxtaposing words or getting oddly micro-specific. She talks about that. I've done that. It unfortunately doesn't usually have the effect I want it to. Getting used to process data for you is like self-checkout. We all do this to some extent. So maybe one of the most effective forms of rebellion and creating change is to mess with the algorithms as much as you can. Everyone. I am in agreement with the idea of boycotting, with taking money out of companies that don't deserve it for one reason or another to force them to consider making changes. But it is equally effective, to my mind, to be a part of some of these companies and fuck with them in a way that forces them also to to consider changing. Chapter 11, sounds for self-optimization. Boomy, fake music streamed by fake listeners. That's boomy. Let them create their own microcosm. Sure, why not? Live in their own bubble. Industry advocacy for protecting their income, masquerading as AI ethics. You can double speak anything, especially if you're got a lot of money. We know the government is doing this. Talking about supporting the less fortunate when all they're really doing is siphoning more money and power and rights from us. Quote from the book, Matthew D. Morrison's work around black sound, or the sonic and embodied legacy of blackface performance as the origin of all popular music, entertainment, and culture in the United States. The music industry seemed set on generative AI to author a new chapter in its long history of exploiting marginalized voices. Cory, if you know Cory Doctorow, you know his coining of inshitification, things getting naturally worse and worse. It's kind of like the Moore's law of social media and streaming apps, but in reverse. Lots of talk about AI companies popping up in the late 2010s, offering fully AI manufactured music. No mention of how computer created music has been around for decades. Not new. There is some distinction between AI as a tool, such as for mastering or stems, and AI used to exploit artists. AI is a tool. It is neutral. It's how it's used that makes the difference. Endel, retrofitting and remixing catalog music to fit mood programming, aka lean back content. Trying to claim a scientific basis for these mood mixes is similar to snake oil. It gives the appearance of legitimacy, but there's no scientific basis for it. Chapter 12, streaming as surveillance. You can download your Spotify data, by the way. The book tells you how to do it. It is comprehensive, but it is often wrong. There's a whole lot of it. And you put all that together, I'm not sure if all this data mining and profiling is doing what companies want, because there's so much that it doesn't get from that. I don't think it's getting an ROI that's worth it. But it circumvents having to hire actual people to do it. Even the author is convinced that there's more hype than substance regarding using data to accurately profile people. And the talking about it so much feeds right into this hype. I couldn't agree more. Data is fucking cheap. You think that, oh my God, if somebody has this data or that data, it's somehow going to, manipulate you or control you in a certain way. It is not nearly as effective as reported. The side note, there's a mix I heard in the Las Vegas airport. It was for some reason more eclectic than any so-called genreless mix I ever heard online, even including most of my own playlists. It was wildly and weirdly eclectic. Voice and face recognition can also be used for so-called emotional mapping. Pretty much that is a pseudoscience. Again. Privacy protection efforts are happening, but mostly in Europe. As Steve and I talked about, the EU has been more at the forefront of important changes than the United States has, or other countries outside of the EU. And I think we need to hope that the EU pushes more for things like this and for regulation that will force these companies to change across the board for all countries. Chapter 13, the first 0.0035 is the hardest. A congresswoman estimated it would take over 800,000 streams per month to equal a $15 an hour job. Don't pay for streams. Spotify does not pay artists directly. It pays the labels and distros lump sums based on how much power and product they have. So we're not getting the full amount. Deliberate obfuscation to deter reform. We don't know where the money goes or how it's really made. And that's harder for them to know how to change things. Streaming was supposed to be a step up from piracy, which has been the case for companies. As I mentioned, by the mid-2010s, all the losses that they were seeing over those previous 15 years, they were starting to see gains because they figured out how to use streaming. But for artists, nah. Many semi-well-known artists have to have one or more day jobs. I guarantee you there are bands, indie bands you've heard of, and they may be touring bands where you don't realize that the members of those bands have other jobs because even their music as a known band is not sustaining them. Bringing up Spotify's change that any song not getting at least 1,000 streams annually is now demonetized. So good luck to me and so many others. Change was meant to boost the lagging revenue of major labels. Period. Yet again, cowing to the rich, placating the powerful, stripping everyone else bare. They posed it as a way to weed out bots and functional music, which is bullshit. Point that the way Spotify tries to tier artists into those who make a living or at least some substantive income and those who don't tacitly promotes an individualistic artist model like me. Rec is a band of one at the moment, because for many on the lower tier, to have more than one person in your band means no one's making enough money. Chapter 14, an app for a boss. To make artists feel like they can grow, increase artist sentiment, it's not working for me. They try so hard, discovery music, whatever it's called, discovery mode, and the Spotify for artists. I don't feel like they give a shit about me. It's called hope labor, work that users do for free in hopes it will lead to future work or money. We all do that. And not only that, we don't all just do work for free. We pay others to feed into our hope labor. So we're losing money with it for this hope labor. I do monitor Spotify for artists with a tiny bit of hope that my numbers will improve, but I know the biz well enough to know that it takes money to make money, and you almost always get nothing for nothing. The author claims that, quote unquote, being a creator is a 21st century invention. I don't know if that's true. Spotify once had the opportunity to change the industry power dynamic by investing in the millions of independent artists, but instead chose to uphold the system as it's always been. Not surprising, as it is business first, one in a long line of wolves in sheep's clothing. An artist I don't know asked a great question. If you're only creating music to fulfill Spotify's paradigm of always having new content, and especially songs that will fit their streaming model and trends, what music are you not creating? And what would that sound like? Again, this is honestly not all that different from the rest of the music industry history, in that it's always been a push-pull between art and commerce, and thousands and thousands of artists have spent money first on the music they thought would sell better rather than the more experimental stuff. I don't know how that's any different from the rest of the history. Every promotion Spotify does, whether for artists or users or whatever, is really just to promote Spotify itself. Chapter 15, indie vibes. We indie artists don't actually have a chance to succeed through sheer hard work and determination without either a megaton of luck or money or knowing somebody. The previous chapter's discussion of the difference between art and content, I think it's simple. If you're making music to game the system into playing or choosing you, you are making content and not art. Maggie Vale of Kill Rock Stars and Bikini Kill Records said, scale is a shitty measure of impact, obvious when considering those unknown forever artists who somehow have millions of streams. Is what I say. So that first part was her quote. But again, it's the idea that I know somebody who showed me, and this person who's working on a day job and their band has hundreds of thousands of streams. You wish it meant more than it did. Independence now means do it all yourself with no support or buy-in from any company or entity, and you either pay dearly in time or money. Same problem defining indie as in the movie industry. There's $1 million indie, there's 6-figure indie, 5-figure indie, and bare bones indie. To me, only the last two really qualify as indie. AWAL, describing an A&R model eerily like the company I'm interviewing with, Ghost Rocket, hello. 3 tiers, and only the top tier does not require the artist to pay something up front for being the privilege of being part of a label. And the decision as to which tier, it's all data-driven. Again, nothing to do with the music. One digital strategist for an indie label says the only hope for indie artists is the imminent collapse of attention economy structures. And indie, as we know it now, is mostly just bedroom pop, at least as far as what's promoted on Spotify. Chapter 16, and we're, 3 more chapters in a conclusion. This is ... payola. Discovery mode, we talked about. We're so used to pay-to-play models now, pay to audition, pay to do anything, that giving up a portion of your streaming royalties to Spotify in exchange for promotion doesn't even seem like a bad thing, but it is. Whether it is or not, what's worse is that you're not getting anything from it of lasting value or impact. Spotify is eking as much as it can out of artists who have the least, like the rest of the world's doing to all of us. And it's also trying to eke as much as it can out of the artists who have the most, let's be honest. Having great music helps, but in the end, it's not about the music. It's a win for Spotify and labels, not for artists and fans, and definitely not for indie artists. Is it possible that because of the history of payola and money in general determining what gets promoted and played and heard, that the entire history of music is a lie? I'm considering doing an episode where there is a kind of a revisionist history of music, where there are artists who, let's say you have Led Zeppelin. There might have been 5 other artists at the time who were as good as, if not better than Led Zeppelin, but weren't pushed in a certain way, and so we don't know who they are. And that history would be different if we understood that it was driven more by commerce than anything else. The FCC and FTC have the power to change practices like this, and ultimately it is not about the technology. Again, technology is neutral. It's about the unaccountable power being wielded by the owners of these companies. Number 17, chapter 17, the lobbyists. Mention of Obama's playlists when he was president. It was a quirky thing. Even though in some ways the early years of streaming were exciting, almost any song or album you could think of immediately at your fingertips, I also remember as an artist a creeping sense of diminishment, coupled with an undying hope that people across the world would hear my music, and that would save my career. That hope. Then again, I was also thrilled with the downloading, the piracy era for a similar reason. And even though it'd be a high compliment that many people pirated my music, I did understand that I was trading that for actually making money. Spotify grew to be one of the 10 biggest tech lobbyers, money-wise, in the United States. Spotify has been battling Apple and complaining about things it also does. Makes me want to see a point-by-point comparison of the two. Steve made this point. She didn't talk that much about Apple Music, which it's not a book about that. I get it. But it would have been nice to hear more of a comparison between Spotify and Apple and Tidal and Deezer and YouTube and Amazon and all of the other streaming services. Spotify, again, is not the worst of the worst. But as far as the big ones, it is absolutely the worst. But how bad is Apple? We have to look that up to find out. Is Spotify one of the many neoliberal companies that purporting to be liberal and supporting, those of us less fortunate and really not? It's very self-serving. Is neoliberalism just a subset of being a libertarian? It's striking that Spotify so Spotify's, history is about 20 years old now, just about, almost. But guess the year Spotify first turned an actual profit. That would be 2024. So all this time, it's been getting buy-in, getting all the money it can, was losing money every single year until 2024. And the only way it made money is just by further scheming major labels, indie labels, and individual artists. Chapter 18, the new music labor movement. Final chapter. Bottom line, execs making money off the backs of artists is age old, but like all current income inequality, it's never been worse. The problem with protests aimed solely at Spotify is that they don't address the systemic issues that can only be fixed by changing laws. There's no chance ever that Spotify is going to change its streaming revenue policies if all other streaming services aren't part of that, because it's competition. It's good that the UMAW and the MWA understood this, and that they are lobbying. Lobbying works when it's got deep pockets and rarely without that. So why don't you hear about more millionaire music people funding lobbying efforts like the above? Like what I just talked about. Or are they? And we just don't know it, and they don't publicize it. It's possible that they are. It's like how Lars Ulrich, was fighting for all musicians supposedly back then during the Napster era. I'm sure there must be big musicians who have a lot of money who are pushing their money towards lobbying efforts to make these changes. I would assume that's true, and I hope it is. It was a decade or less after CDs hit the market that laws were passed to make sure musicians got a percentage of sales from both the discs and the players. It's been more than a decade since streaming took over, and I do not feel like we're getting anything close to that. So once again, CD era was better for musicians. Conclusion. The book's conclusion. Yes, all the apps and tech people wanting your money to beat the algorithm and boost your streams. That's what it is. I have considered paying for people to boost streams, and after reading this book, I don't think I'm ever going to do that. Political counterweights are the only solutions to revenue inequality. We drum it up the way we can, whether that's through protests or boycotts or lobbying or fucking with algorithms, whatever it is, but it's got to end up eventually going to law. Dual solution of improving what's here while working on building something different and better. So, can we improve Spotify, Apple, etc., but also at the same time work towards creating a new system underneath that will eventually take over? Look up catalytic sound, people. I didn't do it, but I want you to. Quote, there's power in collectives of artists pushing back. Another quote, one of the lies of streaming of the modern day music industry, and perhaps it goes along with the lie that's always been in place in certain aspects of the music industry, is that if you play the game in this way, then you should expect a certain result. Stewart told me. This is a quote in the book. If you take a deeper look, the people who have made the biggest impact are the ones who did not play the game the way it was supposed to be played. Don't take advice from a random Facebook or Instagram post that says, want to boost your streams? And it will not work. While catalytic sound is for improv musicians, it suggests that other scenes and styles and regions could use their basic framework and idea and do the same thing. What is that same thing? That's that idea of buying into local artists' careers by creating a collection of local music in libraries and such like, so that you become a member for a couple $100s a year and you get all the music that those, and then artists get a payout for that. I get that the world in general and music in particular need more collaboration and cooperation, but it gets a little wearing hearing the author and the people who talk in this book denigrate solo artists. I understand that she's saying that Spotify has pushed people to be more solo than ever because, and honestly, it's just the culture in general, not just Spotify, because you can't make enough money if you're a band. I get that. At the same time, just as an artist, there are a lot of solo artists who do it because that's the way they want to do it. We have historical amnesia. We always have. That's why we're in the state we're in. Library run streaming focuses revenue locally. Again, trying to spread more than the 20. It's trying to spread to more than the 20 or so libraries that it's in now, but most libraries do not have the infrastructure or money to integrate it. And it's going to take, like I said in the main episode, like an umbrella company to collect all of these 20 or so and more, hopefully, libraries under one roof to really make this a powerful thing. It remains to be seen how much this will be adopted and how much anyone would be interested in using, whether you're a musician or a fan. But I do think small-scale solutions are the best place to start. Start locally, ranked choice voting and all that kind of stuff. It's been said that any population over 1,000, I think, or is it 10,000, is very hard to manage. So it stands to reason that if you're going to try to change things in a culture, you got to start small. I doubt anything like this would pop up in a city the size of New York, nor would most of the people in the city care. Honestly, musicians the least. It's honestly annoying how little of a feeling of community there is among musicians in this city. Ironically, despite Spotify originating in Sweden, Sweden has also had ideal models for how music should be treated and supported in a country, as do several other European countries. Though also, just like other European countries, there's been a surge of right-wing politicians being elected and cutting funding to basically everything. It's diminishing returns for all musicians everywhere, this current society, except for the top tier, for both live performance and recording income. At least since the late 1990s, things have just been going down, 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 down. Everyone should receive a universal basic income, including musicians, and let's not forget that billionaires and trillionaires could fund this for literally everyone. Literally everyone. Unqualified everyone. Well, I agree in principle with Liz Pelly's solution that people need to seek out music from artists they like and actually buy it. Kind of what Steve said. It's very similar to what's going on with the rest of government and society, which is that the solutions always end up needing to be on the backs of citizens and asking more time and work and money and effort from us as opposed to the systems themselves changing. But the problem with that is it's symbiotic. We help the systems change by pushing for that. So it's yes, I think you get tired of hearing that it has to constantly be on our backs, but at the same time, we have to understand that we, as a collective, have the power to change things. I agree with her that I've seen more zines and physical copies of music like cassettes, CDs, and vinyl and other types of indie stuff popping up in the last few years, both online and in actual stores and in print. I do not think she's right that we're losing a lot of music that will never be made. I think more music is being made now than ever before. What we're losing is the tons and tons of music that is already being made, which to me is worse. Somebody decides I'm not going to make music, that's on them these days because you can do it for free. If you're making music and it's being lost in the shuffle, that is a tragedy. As Liz says, we need to find, create, and offer up alternatives that are enticing enough to lure people away from the current system. It's the same with things like climate change, energy, where as soon as you make things like solar and wind as profitable as petroleum, then companies are going to jump on it. Follow the money. Let's just make it an incentive. What's interesting to consider is that every step in the development of music formats has had very early adopters and has taken a few years to change the world. And in every one of those instances, enough people out there understood what was coming next to make it happen. I am having a hard time imagining what could possibly come after streaming, which means on the one hand, I'm kind of scared because what could come after streaming? And on the other hand, I'm kind of excited because no technology has ever lasted more than a couple of decades before something else took over. On the second to last page, what musicians are dealing with today is also what working people everywhere are dealing with. Precarious labor conditions, a lack of universal health care and affordable housing, and generally untenable rising cost of living. Musicians are being squeezed further and further with an ever-growing gap between the wealthy and those living in poverty. Artists are either tremendously successful or told they're worth nothing. Very little in between. We cannot stand for a world that says only the musicians with millions and billions of streams have value just because the people running the pop labels have said so, just because keeping the major labels happy is how Daniel Ek and Martin Lawrenson say they're stay growing their fortunes of billions. That was a quote from the book. I do like how she makes a big push in the last few pages to tie the issues with Spotify and the music industry into what's going on in the rest of the world because they are all connected. Remember my $50,000 manifesto? That was not idle. If you go back and watch that or listen to that, you understand the economic and social and cultural and political principles behind it and how what is being talked about in this book is directly tied to that. That's my rundown of my notes, chapter by chapter for this book. I hope it wet your whistle because I only scratched the surface of what's in here, although I scratched maybe one layer under the surface as well. Thank you for hanging with me for this bonus MXtra. It may be the longest bonus MXtra I've ever done. I guarantee you this is going to be out in the world shortly after this, but thank you, Patreon people, for doing your part for supporting indie creators like me. If you know anybody else out there who would want to support, please send them to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Thanks again. As always, objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. I hope this sparked some ideas you want to talk about, and I will talk to you next week.